84 maintenant.
92.
Ah, ça monte à toute vitesse, mais évidemment, c'est
l'air.
QD, let's begin. We can.
Okay.
Yeah.
We welcome you to our first webinar organized by the IPA website editorial board. Thank you for being so many to participate and from many IPA societies. The subject is the après-coup or deferred action. And our presenters are Bernard Chervet and Dominique Scarfone. They will present their topic, 20 minutes each. After their presentations, they will discuss for 15 minutes, and at the end, it's you, attendees. There will be a question-answer session. During the presentations and their discussion, you can post your question and they will answer during the question-answer session. For doing so, please post your questions in the question pane on the right-hand side of your screen. These will be answered in the question and answer session after the presentations. I would like to introduce our first presenter, Bernard Chervet. Bernard is a training analyst at Paris Psychoanalytical Society, SPP, former SPP president, and author of a keynote report on après-coup. He is also scientific director of the French Language Psychoanalyst Congress. Bernard, please.
Thank you very much, Elena. Good afternoon to all our colleagues in Europe, and good morning to all our colleagues in North America and South America. I will speak slowly, and I hope you will pay attention to do the same after, because my difficulty with pronunciation and understanding. Thank you very much. Very often, the concept of après-coup is put forward as evidence of disparity in English and French school psychoanalysis. Some colleagues have even suggested, humorously, that it's a missing concept in Anglo-Saxon meta-psychology. When I work with non-French school colleagues, exchange seems easy, even if they don't use the concept of après-coup. They recognize that it can lend intelligibility to psychic functioning and to what happens during the session, but they feel they don't need it for their work. It is not a part of their listening process during the session. This requires us to think about the meaning of this concept beyond the use of the word itself. On this subject, it is worth emphasizing that Freud invented the neology of Nachgiebigkeit in 1897, but stopped using it in 1817. However, he had thought in terms of Nachgiebigkeit with its two stages, involving highly complex psychic work from a time much earlier until the end of his work. He had already described it in 1895 in the project, in connection with the income of young patients, drawing on what he had learned from Charcot, and he continued to refer to two stages in psychic work until an outline of psychoanalysis in 1939. He never abandoned the theory linked to Nachgiebigkeit, theory of overdetermination, of a double causality originating in object and in the drives, of the double inscriptions of representation from traces, of recollection with memories and reminiscence, of temporality and discontinuity of cathexis, of child development and the genetic point of view, and theories of trauma and of the psychic work that all human beings have to do in order to take into account the basic traumatic emotional experience which manifests itself in automatic anxiety, fear of breakdown, nameless dread, primitive agony, all linked to the negative therapeutic reactions and the tendencies of negativation beyond the pleasure principle. It is worth recalling here that Freud differentiated automatic anxiety, which he also referred to an anxiety about what is new, 1932, from signal anxiety. Anxiety related to what is new is a form of anxiety which seems to remain as the first time closely linked to the original shock, which then simply repeats itself. It is the anxiety of the compulsion of to repeat, and traumatic neurosis. It is the anxiety of the regressive attraction beyond the pleasure principle. This anxiety related to what is new shows that the process of après-coup is very difficult to realize. It may be that non-French school colleagues pay great attention to this kind of anxiety clinical configuration more than French school colleagues who may pay more attention to the production of the dream work which participates in the realization of après-coup. The Ettingen model used by English school colleagues with its 5 sessions per week is in favor of the construction of continuity against traumatic experience and its specific anxiety. Nevertheless, this continuity comes back through the absence of sessions of the weekend, which is filled as a lack. This may explain why English school colleagues feel they don't need the concept of après-coup, and on the other hand, the goal of such a method is to help bring about the process of après-coup. We can recognize here the differentiation by Freud in 1925 between a negative side and a positive side of all symptoms. The first concerned the realm of the lack, the second, the realm of production. It's also possible to follow the influence of translation in France. The work of structural theory organized in German as S, Ich, and Über, Ich, called in France the second topography, ça, moi, sur moi, contained a great mistake for many years. The S was translated by the soi, which means the self, and it took about 25 years to rectify the translation of the S by the ça in French. So it was impossible to link correctly après-coup and the theory of dual drives. Lastly, we have to add the influence of Lacan and his return to Freud and the importance he ascribed to the term of nachtraglich, which he translated by après-coup. Of course, he mostly emphasized the use of this word in the first topography, the conscious, preconscious, and conscious, because Freud stopped using the word itself in 1917, but not its deep meaning relating to psychic work in 2 stages. All this was very true several years ago. Since then, French analysts have worked a great deal on the process of Nachtraglichkeit, l'après-coup, through many exchanges with non-French school colleagues. These approaches gave a deep meaning and a major place to the phenomenon of après-coup in psychic work, which has had an interesting consequence. When German colleagues translate a French text into German, they have given up translating après-coup by Nachtraglichkeit, and they retain as do many English translators, the French word après coup. So it might seem that the German word and the French one have now acquired different meanings. For German-speaking colleagues, the concept of après coup no longer allows the reverse translation towards the original words Nachhaltigkeit. It's an interesting situation concerning the development of theories thanks to translation. Now, I will share with you some historical elements concerning the concept of Nachhaltigkeit and après coup. This could reduce the gap between them or allows us to better understand their differences. I will begin by recalling how it appears in Freud's works, and then explain some developments which attempt to take greater account of the fundamental quality of all drives, their tendency to return to an earlier state, and ultimately to an inorganic state. I emphasize about that. The text I will read is a small part of a larger article which will be published soon in the IPA dictionary, and which was wrote by me and a team of US and Canadian, North American colleagues. The word Nachhaltigkeit and its translations. The noun Nachhaltigkeit denotes one of the most complex concepts created by Freud. As was his custom, Freud forged it from a word in everyday German, the adjective and adverb nachhaltig. In German, the term Nachhaltigkeit means to carry or to bear towards an after effect. In French, Nachhaltigkeit is translated by the term après coup. In English, the official translation is deferred action. In the United States, subsequentiality was proposed and then abandoned. In the project 1895, only the adverb appears in connection with the case of Emma. Freud insists on the precociousness of the sexual unbinding and its subsequent consequences. Then, in 1896, he speaks of the posthumous effect of infantile trauma, and in 1897, he forges the noun Nachhaltigkeit in his letters to fleas. In the interpretation of dreams, the two-way movement of the phenomenon of après coup, from the present to the past and from the past back to the present, are apparent in a humorous recount of a young man stating that he wishes he had taken full opportunity of his wetness breastfeeding him in the past, while observing another attractive wetness suckling a baby in his adult present. It was through such a story that Nachhaltigkeit made its entrance into current thinking and in humor. It's no longer a specific symptom process. In Little Hans, the interpretation of Freud follows the rationality of the after effect without naming it as such. Then, in the text on the Wolfman, he uses it and gives greater complexity to the concept by considering the sessions themselves and the transference as third after effect necessary to the aim of the treatment, after the famous nighttime dream of the wolves and the diurnal phobia of the wasps. Note again that from 1917 onwards, the term Nachhaltigkeit disappears from his writings, whereas the implication of the biphasic process becomes more frequent. Thus, in 1925, he links the seen and the heard aspect of the castration complex without using the term Nachhaltigkeit. The two-stage and the biphasic process. In the second part of the 19th century, Charcot, the master of the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris had described the chronological organization of the symptom of hysteria in two stages, with a third called the period of psychical incubation or psychical elaboration, between the traumatic event, the shock, and the manifest after effect, the symptoms. Freud took seriously these chronological references and focused his attention on the intervening stage and its works of elaboration. The interpretation of dreams was the product of the attention that Freud paid to this psychical work that takes place during the intermediary period, which Freud renamed the period of latency. This allowed Freud to take into account a new but commonplace psychical operation, the act of latency. In his observation of Emma, a young woman who was suffering from a fear of shopping alone, Freud gives a precise description of defredaction, Nartoglichkeit, by concentrating on the temporal regression within the session. Like Breuer, he gives importance to the backward direction of cathartic remembering. So, he inverts the course of events and time by following the remembering within the session. In this way, he divides the first stage of the event into two regressive scenes, of which one, scene 1, is recent and reconstituted, and the other, scene 2, is older and unconscious in the strict sense of the word. He calls scene 1 the first recollection and recent scene, Emma's memory, coaching, Emma's memory of being laughed at by shop assistants and entering a shop when she was 13. And scene 2, the second remembrance and older scene, quote, the repressed memory of being molested in another shop when she was 8. The second stage, a symptomatic event, was the agoraphobia. The two events are separated by the period of latency. This period of latency can easily be observed within the development of human sexuality with its two phases, but can also be seen in ordinary daily mental functioning. The act of putting into latency is an operation involved in the theory of dreams, in the oscillation between day and night, and it's particularly observable from its after effects during the sessions of hypnosis and analysis. The intervening events, namely the night and the session of analysis, constitute period of latency occupied by unconscious regressive psychic work. The dream work and its results, the libidinal regeneration and awakening become prototype of regressive psychical activities accomplished in the passivity of latency. It was the elaboration in 1920 of fundamental quality of all drives, the tendency to return to an earlier state and ultimately to the inorganic state, which was decisive in the disappearance of the use by Freud of the concept Nartoglichkeit. On the other hand, this tendency to an extinctive regression of the drives explains the biphasism of the process. The importance given to the progressive direction by the word Nartoglichkeit does not sufficiently take into account the other aspect of the process, the major role of the regressive psychical work on the traumatic and regressive aspiration, an essential aspect which is fulfilled on a daily basis by the dream function with regard to the many traumatic incidents of the day before the dream. The account of this concept does not stop here. It continues a trajectory which completes the enactment of what it designates. Following a first period of manifest emergence and a disappearance that went unnoticed, it resurfaced in France with Jacques Lacan. At this point, it became a fundamental concept of French psychoanalysis, linking up again with the French origins, Charcot, of the process itself and its diphasic character. The fate of this concept may be explained by the evolution of the theory of regression and of trauma with the internalization of the notion of traumatism. After being linked to a seduction involving an adult seducer who is supposed to precipitate the temporality of the development of sexuality and the ego free the precociousness of the former or the prematurity of the latter, the definition of the traumatic event evolves in Freud writings. It becomes a conflict between sexual impulses and ego impulses, with a re-sexualization of narcissism due to the negative aspiration of the primary repression. This conception links up with the one present in the studies of hysteria of an attraction of the repressed traumatic core. As from 1917, this negative effect of the traumatic event continued to gain importance due to the study of war neurosis. This resulted in the recognition of a traumatic neurosis outside the domain of the pleasure principle. This situation challenged to some extent the theory of dreams. From now on, there were not always wish fulfillments. In 1920, Freud linked the notion of trauma to a quality inherent in the nature of the drives themselves, their generic tendency to return to a previous state and ultimately to the inorganic state. The traumatic dimension is internalized. The event becomes endo-psychic. It may be triggered by an external event, a trauma, but may also have an endogenous origin. This negativation, this negativizing attraction searches, changes, and co-opts, indeed creates an external event allowing for the elaboration on a false connection, a causal theory with the aim of modifying this regressive economy with a negativizing power. To conclude, in Freud's writing, the noun Natürlichkeit gradually came to refer to a dynamic unconscious psychic process and its manifest results, initiated by a traumatic event, first a shock, which turns later into a shocking sexual event. Then its repression during a period of undetermined length, an unapparent regressive psychic work, transforming the libidinal economy of the repressed event, and then the promotion of posthumous returns of the repressed event, which are substitutive psychic products. Thus, what is referred to as deferred effect and initial shock varies according to the point of view taken. According to chronological logic, it is the symptom which is the deferred effect. According to the logic of recollection, it is the retrogressive memories which are the deferred effects. And according to psychoanalytical logic, each recall is a deferred effect of an unconscious memory which has acquired, subsequent to its repression, the value of the traumatic event. In the first model, the effect is linked to a traumatic event. In the second, to the unconscious memory. In the third, to the transference onto the analysis of the regressive attraction and the necessity of the verbalization. The adjective and the adverb naturlich emphasize the diachronic organization of the thought process in two stages, and the concept of après coup emphasizes more the unconscious psychic work, which is a non-linear process that consists of two manifest stages and a latent one, which involves unconscious psychic processes. In the first process, it was the German process. In the second time, processes, it's the word Vorgang in German. Here we can notice another effect of translation. In German, there are two words which are translated by process, process and Vorgang. In English, only one, process, and in French, only one, two, processus. Through translation, the meaning of development is increased at the expense of the psychic work, the Arbeit in German. While initially only linked to the genesis of historical symptom, the process of après coup gradually became the essence of the diphasic nature of human sexuality, connecting the Oedipal period to puberty, interrupted by the period of latency. It was then extended to ordinary mental functioning and to the oscillation between night and day, involving both the regressive and progressive paths. Thus, its generalization to the whole thinking was reinforced at a time when the term itself ceased to be used. Little by little, within the sessions, the analytic situation intermingles the reminiscence and the particular different effect of each protagonist. Hence, the creation of a neo-production, the analytic après coup, or analytic different effect, the ego, non-ego, specific to the session, a neo-reality full of cross-reminiscences from transference and counter-transference. The analytic different effect became the level of the therapeutic action. In each session, it has its place within the session, within the sequences, and in the totality of the treatment. Thank you for hearing me. Yeah, I don't hear you.
Thank you, Bernard, for your presentation. Yes. Now I would like to introduce our second presenter, Dominique Scarfone. Dominique is a training analyst at Montreal Psychoanalytic Society. He is professor at Montreal University, author of a keynote report on Actual, and associate editor of the International Journal of Psychoanalysis. Dominique, please.
Thank you, Elena. I just wish to mention that I'm a former associate editor at the International, but that's just a detail. I want to say hello to everyone and thank you for being there. I will try to give an outline of the concept in perhaps a slightly different terms than those that Bernard used, but as you will see, there will be a number of cross-references that we have together, having been both trained in the French tradition of psychoanalysis, but I'll try to address slightly different aspects. What I try to show is how the concept of après coup is importantly linked to the concept of psychic reality and of psychic temporality, but most importantly, how it accounts for the very possibility of change occurring during analysis. I will also go back to the question of translation, because we have to ask ourselves, why the French name? Why don't we say Nachtraglichkeit or deferred action, but speak of après coup. I would say that, in fact, the concept is truly a French concept, not because it should remain within the French area of psychoanalysis, but because it was excavated from Freud's thinking through translation into French. And if we had time, we could go deeper into the importance and actually the centrality of the process of translation, not only in the functioning psyche, but also in the process of theory construction. For now, let me just remark that the concept was found / created by Lacan, as Bernard has already hinted, reading astutely, I would say, into Freud's term Nachträglichkeit. Now, this original word in Freud, Nachträglichkeit, is a substantive that he constructed, such as the German language allows, from adjectives or verbs. It is derived actually from the adjective nachträglich, which in German simply designates the character of what comes after. So if we take it out of context, Nachträglichkeit has no special significance or special conceptual meaning in German. And actually we could say, and Bernard addressed this aspect when he said that Germans now use the term après coup, and it's, I think, right in line with what we are saying. But as Laplanche has shown, the adjective is often used by Freud, the adjective nachträglich, often used by Freud in its very plain sense, something coming after. But there is, of course, a special context, and Bernard has already spoken about it, in a few places in Freud where the word takes a specific and different meaning. It is namely in the Wolfman and in first and foremost in the second section of the project. And in this project precisely, it is most clear that the word is meant to explicate a specific process in the psyche regarding the construction of a psychological trauma, the building up, I should say, of a psychological trauma. Bernard has described it, briefly said, we could say that it takes two events separated in time to make a single trauma, such as the one as we read about in this historical document of Freud's, where the little Emma becomes phobic at 13, but the analysis unveils that she had already been abused, as Bernard narrated earlier, when she was 8, and that it took the second event in reverberation with the first to create a trauma from which she tried to escape by forming the symptom of phobia. Now, it is interesting to notice how Strachey translated the word as deferred action. The problem with this translation is that it conceives of the sequence as a linear one, much like the sequence of events in the explosion of a time bomb. You build the bomb and adjoin a timer, and what you have set up at the time that you have set up will later make the bomb explode. Later, that is Nachtrag in German. From a purely linguistic point of view, this is all right. This is a very legitimate translation. And mind you, even the French expression après coup in ordinary speech has this kind of meaning. I was in Paris and ate at restaurants the marvelous French cuisine, and après coup, I realized that I had put on a few pounds. We don't have much of a concept here. And here we have, therefore, to introduce the difference between the notion of retrospective versus retroactive. Retrospectively, I realized that I ate too much and that I gained weight because of that. But it's not when I realized that I ate too much that I gained the weight. It's because I noticed that I gained weight, and I looked afterwards, après coup, to see where these extra pounds come from. What the concept of après coup implies is a retroactivity, and it's not really simple retroactivity, as we shall see. It implies a much more complex form of temporality, one in which the chronologically second event, or coup in French, the blow, so to speak, not only yields a retrospective view, that is how I understand why I gain weight, but more importantly, it has a retroactive effect, an after effect, as it were, that is, something new is created because of the conjunction of the two separate events. Now, this is highly important, because it seems that, therefore, that in this sort of process, the time arrow has been reversed. This, of course, challenges the theory of time in general, and especially physical time. In the realm of physics, of course, this is impossible. You cannot do something today that will change the past. You know, the movie Back to the Future was obviously just an imaginary story. I do not gain weight, again, by realizing that I ate too much. The causality was linear. The time arrow is pointing in its usual direction from past to present and to future eventually. But in the realm of psychic reality, things can operate differently. A chronologically second blow, or coup, has a retroactive consequence. There is a reverberation, a to and fro in psychic time, which yields a new and unexpected sequence. Après coup contains but goes beyond the simple idea of deferred or posthumous effect. Let me give you a brief clinical example. A patient was referred to me in the service of psychosomatics many years ago with residual headaches from a car accident that she had suffered a year or two before, and neurologists could not find any way of explaining those persisting headaches, which were really handicapping the patient, who had them much too frequently to be able to work. Now, this car accident could have been thought of as, you know, a normal, rather frequent event, and therefore the psychological meaning of it didn't seem at all obvious, until the curiosity of the analyst was to do an anamnestic inquiry into the story of the patient, and discover that there was an earlier accident when the patient was 5 years old. And in this accident, the patient was the older sister of a younger boy, and she had insisted to keep her little brother in her own arms while the mother was driving the car. So a drunken conductor smashed the car in which the mother and the two children were driving, and when they woke up from the shock, they had been unconscious, all of them, they discovered that the boy was dead, his head smashed on the stick shift of the car. So the further inquiry will show that there was, and the patient is able now to recognize that there was a strong rivalry between her and her little brother, since until this little brother was born, she was the only child, and she was the father's little boy, so to speak. And the birth of the brother displaced her as the father's preferred child. So I won't go into more details, just to show, therefore, that the significance of the second accident is totally changed by discovering the meaning of the conjunction of the two accidents connected with the unconscious guilt that was associated with a first forgotten car accident. So here we have the fact that we can have an après coup in the creation of the symptom. That is, the second accident unleashes, so to speak, the guilt, as if it was telling the patient, this is all you deserve, and for having survived this second very serious accident, she has the survivor guilt regarding her brother. But most importantly, it also gives another coup, another possibility, another blow, which is the fact that by resuscitating the guilt and the anxiety regarding the first accident, we can give meaning to the symptom, and therefore the patient could be freed from this very nasty headache that handicapped her very importantly. So we see that we have here a structure where the psyche is able to retroactively give a meaning to a first event and unconsciously build up a traumatic result with the formation of symptom in response to that trauma, but also that it gives us the possibility to undo the symptom by giving the psyche the opportunity to start again its march forward. I am here addressing, therefore, the special kind of temporality of the unconscious. Freud said that the unconscious is timeless. I would rather say that since we have this very complex temporality, we should not think of it as timeless. I'd rather like to use the expression the unpassed, l'impassé, or l'actuel in French, which means that there is, if we had to put this sort of time on a clock, we would have to say that the time is always now, 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 repetitively. Winnicott, on his part, describes a similar thing a bit differently by observing that a patient may fear a breakdown happening in the future, whereas it had already occurred but was not registered in the ego. So you could imagine that the first blow is there, but under a form of time that does not pass. It is not truly past, it is ingrained in unconscious actuality, if you allow me the expression. A second blow happens, and then the reverberation between the two creates a new, truly original event that could not be explained by either of the two components alone. For instance, in the case of little Emma, the first abuse at the age of 8 was really a very minimal one, and the second event at age 13 was rather insignificant, just seeing two clerks laughing between themselves in the shop, and from that she was traumatized. The concept, therefore, is not simply important in theoretically accounting for psychopathology. It is mostly important in understanding how psychoanalysis works, how the psyche works, but therefore how the psychoanalytic process also can allow for change during the analysis, how psychic transformation is possible. Analysis indeed is a reopening of the process of infantile seduction, as Bernard had pointed at earlier, and therefore it elicits transference, and transference will create events that can retrospectively modify the whole psychic structure. This is because we are dealing with psychic reality and not with physical reality. Now, psychic reality, as Freud said, is just as real as physical reality, but it's a different form of reality. And we can say from our experience and from the concept that was constructed in reading Freud, that psychic reality allows for the reversal of the arrow of time, although it in physical terms, when you look at the world from the physical point of view, there is always the same arrow pointing in the same direction. So we do analysis by allowing for new blows, for new après coup to happen during the treatment, and by that process we insert chronological time where there was before only this unpassed or this non-passing time. So as Winnicott would say, we are able to put things into the past tense. I am here again referring to the fear of breakdown, or as de Musin also indicated, you know, that analysis is in one, if you look at it in some way, it is about building the category of the past where there was no past before. So it is a matter of putting the psyche onto a new progressive work towards the future, towards having a future, because we are freed from the loops of repetition of the past. That is, the après coup that was forming the symptom has the nasty habit of being repetitive and of being in a loop, whereas the reopening, thanks to analysis, allows for new coup to appear, which direct the processes towards the future. Now, it's important here to also recognize that this means that analysis itself can produce blows, can produce events that are causing anxiety in the patient, because we are reopening a process that was somewhat, you know, shakily solved through the formation of symptoms or through the formation of character traits. So analysis is never a comfortable experience in that aspect, under that aspect, but it is a necessary moment to go through in order to reopen the processes and give the future a chance. I think I will stop here for now in order to give us much more time, as much time as possible for discussion.
Thank you very much, Dominique. Now it's the time of your discussion between you two. Please do so.
Yes, we are very close. It seems your development is very close. Of course, several points, but I share a lot all what you say about the modification, the function of the construction, the function of après coup in construction. I did not use it. It's a good thing you go to the construction. Some other authors, maybe in North America, I don't know, as you, used a lot in the way of the growth. So I think all the genetic point of view can be think by the après coup, not in a linear way, in an unlinear way also. It was the first remark. The other is what I think we are very close together about the function of the sessions also, the importance of the session. They are used by the patient to try to organize this process. They use the session. For me, it's not only the session who produce the second event, it's the patient who find in the session or outside the session, but during the psychoanalysis, they search, they create, they found events and events within the session to success this process. It's I think the concept of thinking of Winnicott about to search, to find, to create is can be mixed, to can be
associated.
Meet our conception of the après coup, because I think perhaps the people, the two young men that Emma met in the shop was not occupied by her, but she was sure her. They speak about her, and they speak about what happened in her past, in a past that she don't know. She has, she knows only the effect of the past. She don't know what was this past, but she was sure. They speak about her. She found them. It's not the two young men who search Emma. It's Emma who need to find these people to modify the economy of the traumatic economy of the first events. It's important. And what another thing you bring also very important. If I have the time, I prepare also a small piece of clinical of session during the session only to show how the après coup take its place in the session. With the role of the guilt, the unconscious guilt. It's very, not only the conscious guilt, but the role of unconscious guilt. It seems very important in your example. Mm-hmm. My first reflection.
Okay. What perhaps I would like to insist upon is the importance of translation, not only translation of Freud's texts. And I think that what you mentioned about the Germans who will use the expression après coup and not Träglichkeit is very interesting. And that yes. is right in line with the fact that until the French translation by Lacan and then in the vocabulary by Laplanche and Pontelis and so on, it was not a concept in German. German readers of Freud could go through the text without noticing that there is a concept there. You know, it seems a very normal expression.
Yes, but oh, sorry, go.
And the same thing happens with Strachey. Strachey understands Nachträglichkeit in a very normal way. That is, you have one thing happening today, and later it will have an effect. But the explanation of how this effect happens later is completely absent. Whereas the reverberation with the reversal of the time arrow in the notion of après coup has an explanatory power that is simply linear or even non-linear after effect does not have. And this is only through translation. For instance, in the term Nachträglichkeit, there is no mention of a blow. You know, it's only in the translation après coup that we see there is a first blow and a second blow, so that the translation, as Walter Benjamin would say, enriches the text, elevates the text in Freud, and enlightens aspects that could be missed in the original. So this is very important because it so happens that translation itself functions in the manner of an après coup. That is, we discover later by translating that there was something very different than we thought in the beginning, and this changes the whole reading of Freud. So this points to me to the centrality of translation, as I said very briefly at the beginning, and that is how, if we go back to formerly letter 52 of December 6, 1896, where Freud describes the process of transcription and translation between memory traces, between the registrations of memory, we see that the après coup is always there, although it is not mentioned at that time as certainly not as a concept, but we have there the link with the way the mind or the psyche functions, that is, in a translational model, which is so very important because what patients come to us with are, so to speak, translations that they made by themselves of what happened to them during their lifetime. And that analysis is about undoing those pre-existing translations and allowing for new possible translations that are more symbolizing in a more encompassing way, and therefore giving more freedom to the patient in confronting the future events in their life. So I think that it's so interesting that the concept of après-coup is intimately linked with the way the mind works, with the way the analysis works, and therefore it is important that we explain to colleagues from other areas who do not make use of that concept how important this is. Because I remember this international meeting in Paris, 1998, about après-coup. I was the leader of a group there that was discussing the main presentations made by Green, Laplanche, and Roussillon. This was a meeting organized by Heidi Fember, and the American colleagues that were present, they understood what they thought they understood what we meant in French, but they said it seems to be so pervasive, the concept is everywhere, therefore is it really a useful concept? I would like to insist for our listeners that the concept is not everywhere. Not everything is après-coup, but that après-coup is a formidably central concept if we want to understand how symptoms are formed, how trauma happens, how trauma results into repetitive loops, and how we can get out of those loops by the après-coup offered by analysis.
Yes, but I fully agree with that, because Freud needed a concept. It's a neologism. It's not only it's a neologism from a banal and a general word, but the same in France. Après-coup exists of adjective, adverb, the same, and the après-coup did not exist. It does not exist outside the psychoanalysis. It's not possible. It exists only in the metapsychology. And
it's a true concept.
Little by little, it becomes a concept to speak the structure of the thinking, the thought. It's a very large concept about the organization of the thought, not only about the. But I am very, very close, because it's not only about the retranscription. It's not only the change of meaning. It's not. It's more. It's a huge function we can think by the après-coup that the thinking is pushed by the traumatic dimension, and not by a trauma, not especially an event, a trauma which could be an event, but I insist a bit about that, something inside the drives which compels the human being to think, and it becomes the structure of the thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But not only because the events and the treatment of the events, the treatment of something which is inside the drives. It's very important after 1920 to think.
But couldn't we say, Bernard, that the drives themselves can be looked at as creating events in the psyche that need to be après-coup translated into something representable, and that they have a traumatic effect and so on.
Yes,
so that
I
the model is the same.
Yes, I think the origin is the drives, and the events meet the drives, and the drives meet the events, and search the events to realize the psychic work. I agree, fully agree with this point of view. It's not only reinscription, retranslation, new meanings. It's more important that this apparent result. It's the apparent result is the retranscription, but in the reality, it's more important. It's inside the functioning of the thinking of the psychic work, I think.
Well, perhaps we disagree a bit here. I think that translation or retranscription is inherently to every psychic process. I think I understand what you mean by saying that the drives are what the motive force behind it. Yes, it's what translation has to confront itself to in order to create meaning, but the process is inherently internal to the mind.
Yes, and it's the process. In this process, the drives, the psychic work, the psychic process of work, the psychic Vorgang, and not only the word process, the Vorgang in the German, and the object, the third point of view, the point of view of the drives, the point of view of the process, the mechanism in works which work in the psychic work, and third, the role of the object, the third are implicated in the après-coup for me.
Oh yes, definitely. Without the analyst listening to the advent of the next coup, nothing would happen. That it takes a listener to reverberate what is happening and eventually even lend the words to the patient in order to make psychic what is a crude fact. I think we agree on that.
It's impossible for the drive to take form, to find a form without that. The drives are not. It's not possible for them to find an expression, a form without the psychic work. Yeah, I agree. Yes.
Eliana, I see the time now, perhaps.
Okay. Thank you very much, first of all, for your thoughts on these topics. Maybe you will continue with our participants because it's the time of the question from the audience. I would like to present you the first question to both of you. That is, could deferred action be the natural condition of all consciousness with different degrees of intensity, while the exception is straight cognitive functions, perception or attention, etc.?
Well, as I was, can I go first? As I was saying just a moment ago, I believe, and in this I am not inventing the idea. I am borrowing from many sources, but I do believe that essentially what the mind is about is translating, that is constructing meaning. But the construction of meaning is not a straightforward process. It's not a linear process. There is always in the very process of translation, there is a first meaning, and then there is the residue that was not possibly translated, and which requires going back to what we translated first, and eventually, rediscover another meaning, and so on, in a spiral that is always going on. And this is also visible in neuroscience. For instance, you have Carl Friston in Britain or Rodolfo Linares in New York, who clearly conceive of the brain as the constructor of meaning in order to be capable of predicting predicting what the environment shall be if I move from place A to place B. I need to be able to predict so as not to expose myself to some unexpected danger. So this is what the brain and the mind, in the general sense of the word, in the cognitive sense of the word, do. But psychoanalysis addresses a very specific part of that event, and that it is, we are looking more at the relationship with another human being, and therefore with the communications that contain a certain number of enigmas which require on our part an interpretation, a translation that cannot be totally successful as when we are children, because there is a discrepancy between the adult who is endowed with a repressed unconscious and therefore emits more things than they can possibly know, and the child who is not equipped with making sense of every aspect in the adult, and especially the sexual dimension. So that we have here the après coup is essential in our practice and in our theory, because we are addressing this special area of the functioning mind. And indeed, in this case, there is a to and fro between present, past, which creates a reverberation that allows for après coup. Whereas in cognitive function, I think that we have a sort of spiral, but it's not the functioning après coup in the way that we describe it. It's more, it's not necessarily linear, but there's no reversal, there's no retroactive effect. The retroactive effect is only between humans, I would say. So it's not about cognition in general. Looking at a tree and asking myself what kind of tree this is, and then looking into the dictionary and discovering the name, does not really change my experience of having seen the tree. But discovering that the second accident was just an evocation of a first accident and all the guilt and so on and so forth, that changes my mind, really, you see.
Yeah. It seems this question very linked with the theories in North America. Maybe we have model, and the friend of model was Edelman. And
Edelman,
yes, Gerald Edelman with his Nobel Prize for discoveries of biology, but at the end of his life, he worked a lot about the structure of the consciousness, and he introduced the concept of re-entry, and I think it's a model was a colleague of North America who proposed many works about après coup. Perhaps this question, I don't be sure, but perhaps this question is linked with this conception of Edelman and model. My answer, because the sentence is with two parts in the sentence. In the first sentence, I will say, okay, I fully agree with the idea that diffraction is the natural condition of all consciousness. The result of this process is to becoming conscious as the aim of Freud during many years. He never stopped to think that the link with the consciousness, it's the essence of the therapy of psychoanalysis. It's very important. So I agree with that, with different degree of intensity. I agree also a lot with that. While the exception, it's very interesting to introduce the idea of exception, because it would tell that some people or everybody sometimes can have a psychic functioning, which could be straight cognitive function. Say we come back at the ego psychology, and with a cut from the psychic work and the perception. It's not. It's very interesting, but because some people, or sometimes we have this functioning, but it's when we cut the perception from our psychic work. It's because I think the perception is more complex. It's maybe it's a mixed from what we create from the hallucinatory ways, and from the other ways, from perception. We have a mixed about perception, and it's very, very difficult to differentiate it. What comes from the perception stricto sensu, we can say stricto sensus, and what is the participation of the identity of perception, what with the hallucination. I think we live with this mixed, and it's very complicated to imagine that the cognitive function could be separated from our hallucinate functioning. My idea, but some patients, sometimes some moment of the functioning can be with this in this way, and maybe it's a great difficulty for this patient to cut their deep, the psychic deep. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. There are some questions that they are already addressed. You can see at your panel box.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
There is one.
Yes, the first one is addressed to both of you.
The first one, I think, is that the one we just answered, no?
There is not a second one?
Yeah, there's a second one. It reads, could it be that après coup could be seen as a sudden manifestation of transference? Is that the second one?
Yes.
We can inverse this sentence and think that the transference is always an après coup. It's not après coup. Sometimes it's the transference, but in the wolf man, the man of the wolves, we can Freud showed us that how the transference was the après coup itself.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with that, except to mention that the manifestation of transference is a way of repeating in a loop the après coup that was formed in the psyche of the patient. You know, Freud called these in German cliché, that is stereotype plates that are ready to be repeated in the transference. But the function of après coup happens in the transference as a possible reopening of what is at stake in the transference in order to exit the loop of repetition, so that the aspect of repetition that is in the transference is, so to speak, a closed après coup, whereas we need new blows to happen in the analysis to put the process into work in a more open-ended way, rather than just repeating the past.
Yes. when you tell in this way, Dominique, this question open another question. When the après coup is succeed, arrive to his la fin, the end, when the process of après coup succeed to the end, when it's enough, and after another necessity will another way, another necessity to treat new events, new drives, new drive effects will happen. But we know very well that in the sequence of sessions, one dream, two dream, three dream, and at a moment the dream can stop a moment, because the result is the treatment of the traumatic dimension is succeed. I think it's important, because it's not always the repetition of the après coup. As you said, you told a moment ago, the construction is important, and sometimes after several nights, several weeks, or several months of work, it arrived to a result, sufficient result. Yes, of course.
Certainly.
So it's,
yes, but
important.
And eventually life will give other opportunities for new après coup to be formed. But indeed, this is what you're saying is very important. Of course, otherwise analysis, we could not be effective in any way if there wasn't a point where we feel that we have crossed a bridge, we have really worked through our way into the resistance of the transference.
Yes, and we can hear the après coup working within a session, within a sequence of session, or sometimes when we read a long analysis, we discover some après coup who embrace the whole analysis as the children life. Yes, good.
That's right.
Oh, I see that Heide Fenberg is coming to ask a question, but we can't read the question.
Okay, I proposed, maybe for the first time, 1998, that après coup and fear of breakdown can be understood in Winnicott's paper, with the condition that the concept proposed by Freud in letter 52 could be broadened. Question to both. Do you agree?
Dear Heide, I hope you heard me saying similar things to what you are just saying. I think I do agree. And we were told not to quote too much from other authors, but of course your contribution is here. I mentioned that you had organized this meeting in Paris in '98, and I think that indeed what you are pointing at is totally, in my view, totally exact, totally true. That is that we can read Winnicott's fear of breakdown within the key of après coup, and that après coup is intimately, as I said, intimately related to letter 52 and the process of translation or retranscription, and the failure of retranscription, which is what Freud called repression. This is the other theory of repression in Freud that is not very well known throughout the analytic community, and not for nothing. This makes even more central the concept of après coup. So I want to salute Heide. I'm happy that you're there, and salute your contribution. I think that you've done a lot to popularize the concept, and thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think Heide brought two aspects of the link with the breakdown of Winnicott as the first event, internal event, which will be worked by après coup, by the process of après coup. It's very important, but she also learn us and bring for the psychoanalysis. But the listening of après coup is very important in the way to hear the patient and to listening of the association of the patient and the way of the déroulement,
unfolding.
The path, the what?
Unfolding.
Out?
Unfolding.
The unfolding of the analysis. It's important, this listening of and the third aspect is that the third aspect perhaps more present now in the theories of the analyst is the après coup, which is constructed by both from one and the both psychic which are linked by the same process of après coup. It's we can speak. We could have a reflection also about the care analytic of the Hodgen, of the object analytic of Green. You spoke sometimes ago about the Musin, the chimère of the Musin. All are some après coup which are constructed by both the two protagonists of the session, and the listening of Heidelberg is very rich and very interesting for that. Yes. Thank you, Heide.
Are there other questions?
Yes. Yes, there are other questions. I have sent you some. I will read one. It's a big... We don't see him. Okay. It's a question from Charles Goodstein. Please comment on the following. It is addressed to Dominique. The American analyst Novick's wrote on deferred action and did not use the term après coup in this situation. Situation 1. A group of 5-year-olds are exposed to the knowledge of a terrible tragedy involving the murder of a peer acquaintance, but none of these children react to the symptoms or later memories, and all apparently develop problem-free. 2. At 17, about to leave home for college, the same group individually exhibit overwhelming anxiety as if they had been recently traumatized. 3. Only in treatment do they recall the tragedy of age 5. One partial explanation, the perceived danger of separation from parents, revived the memory of a time when a child was not protected by parents. Please comment.
Well, I think it's a very good case for showing the difference between deferred action and après coup, in the sense that, again, in plain language, you could call that deferred action. You know, the consequences of the trauma are only experienced later when the same children have now a new task before them, which is to go to college, I guess, and they develop anxiety, whereas you know, they were symptom-free until then. I think that this therefore speaks in favor of the idea that it's not just, you know, the deferring of the consequences later in time, because you have to look at why does this happen when they are older at this present, in this particular situation, and not any time, not in any other time. Therefore, if it was just deferred, in the sense delayed, it could happen at 10, at 15. It happens when they are a little older. But the task that they are now confronted with is resonant. There is a resonance, a reverberation with the earlier event. And at the same time, I think that the third part, which if I think I remember it well, it speaks also in favor of the fact that, of course, when we see an event that is datable in childhood, it doesn't mean that this is truly the very first event. There can be other situations, and you know that Freud himself was brought under the pressure of Otto Rank to give, in 1925, in inhibition symptoms of anxiety, to give a certain weight to the trauma of birth. He didn't want to make it the explain all situation, but he acknowledged with Rank that, you know, there was a kind of prototype there that could account for the vulnerability to some events where separation is involved. So here we have you know, a good example, I think, that yes, you know, from a layman point of view, you can call it deferred action. But if we want to think of it more conceptually, more strictly speaking, from a metapsychological point of view, it's not deferred to any time at all. It is precisely linked with a time structure where there is an effect that is retroactive, and which gives the first event the power to traumatize these youth that were apparently not traumatized when the first event happened. So I think that it's a very nice example.
Yes, yes, it's good. Very, of course, very important about the clinical aspect of tragic aspect, and it seems the question wanted to introduce also the tragedy, not only the tragic way in the clinic, but the tragedy inside the functioning. Or maybe I don't understand. I understand the two sides, the clinical sides with the tragedy, with the events, with very tragic events. On the other side, how the tragedy, the tragic dimension of the human condition, what happened about the après coup. Of course, I think if there is a murder against the realization of the après coup. There is this process is not easy to be realized, and there are some obstacles, and real movement of murder against the realization of the après coup, which can be a great tragedy in the life, and even in the psychoanalysis for some patients who destruct this process inside the session, inside. I think I understand the question in these two phases. As the article of Freud of 1925, symptom inhibition, anxiety, which when Freud described that everything has two phases, the negative phases and the positive, the production, and the other phase of the symptom, the negative one. And I think it's maybe it's this way the people who ask this question wanted to tell us, but it's by this way and understand this question.
And there are some other questions, but we don't have the time to answer. We would like to thank you very much, Bernard and Dominique, for their brilliant presentation and for their so interesting and lively discussion. Thank you very much to all the participants for your presence and for your active participation. Our next webinar is in a month, on the 21st of January, so save the day. We will discuss on training models with Jorge Canestri and Alain Gibault. We look forward to these discussions, and until then, thank you all for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elena. Thank you very much to all. Thank you, Dominique. Bye.
Bye.